On August 16th, Modern Day Debate hosted a debate between Craig McNeil and Andrew of Dragon Fist Martial Arts on the topic of ethics. At 1 hour, 48 minutes, and 57 seconds of the debate, during the Q&A, I challenged Craig McNeil to...
This one coming in from Kevin Berger says, name one immoral act any of secular humanism's 3 manifestos explicitly prohibits, Craig. This isn't an endorsement of anything but an internal critique.
Craig McNeil says...
Which manifesto is he referring to?
Because he said any of the 3.
Any of the 3. What was the question again?
He said, name one immoral act that any of the 3 manifestos explicitly prohibit.
Taking away people's agency, taking away people's personal what's the word I'm looking for? Taking away consent and not allowing humans to flourish, and going against suffering. So it specifically says that making people suffer is wrong, and it specifically says that you shouldn't do things like rape and attack, because they are taking away people's consent and people's agency. So it specifically, according to I think it's the second tenet of the American Humanist Manifesto, it's the 10th tenet of the Humanist Manifesto, which talks about personal agency and consent, which means it would specifically not allow immoral acts like rape, which would take away those things.
Amazing. Every word of what you just said was wrong.
Craig, please quote from any of the Humanist manifestos where exactly the prohibition you just referenced can be found. You can't, because said prohibition does not exist. You are
clearly lying.
That is your own interpretation of the text. Nowhere in any of the 3 Humanist manifestos does the text expressly say, do not do this, with regard to any act. Not for murder, not for rape, not for genocide, not for slavery, not for violations of autonomy or personal agency. The texts themselves prohibit absolutely nothing. They don't even provide a proper framework for making such a determination. The 10th tenet of Humanist Manifesto 1. 10th. It follows that there will be no uniquely religious emotions and attitudes of the kind hitherto associated with belief in the supernatural. Notice, there is no explicit prohibition against any act. The 10th tenet of Humanist Manifesto 2. 10th. Humane societies should evaluate economic systems not by rhetoric or ideology, but by whether or not they increase economic well-being for all individuals and groups, minimize poverty and hardship, increase the sum of human satisfaction, and enhance the quality of life. Hence, the door is open to alternative economic systems. We need to democratize the economy and judge it by its responsiveness to human needs. Testing results in terms of common good. Notice, there is no explicit prohibition against any act. Humanist Manifesto number 3 doesn't even have 10 tenets. It has 6. Well, he did say the second tenet originally. Maybe it's... no, it's not. The second tenet of Humanist Manifesto 1. Second, humanism believes that the man is part of nature and that he has emerged as a result of a continuous process. Notice, there is no explicit prohibition of any act. The second tenet of Humanist Manifesto 2. Second, promises of immortal salvation or the fear of eternal damnation are both illusory and harmful. They distract humans from present concerns, from self-actualization, and from rectifying social injustices. Modern science discredits such historic concepts as the ghost in the machine and the separable soul. Rather, science affirms that the human species is an emergence from natural evolutionary forces. As far as we know, the total personality is a function of the biological organism transacting in a social and cultural context. There is no credible evidence that life survives the death of the body. We continue to exist in our progeny and in the way that our lives have influenced others in our culture. Traditional religions are surely not the only obstacles to human progress. Other ideologies also impede human advance. Some forms of political doctrine, for instance, function religiously, reflecting the worst features of orthodoxy and authoritarianism, especially when they sacrifice individuals on the altar of utopian promises. Purely economic and political viewpoints, whether capitalist or communist, often function as religious and ideological dogma. Although humans undoubtedly need economic and political goals, they also need creative values by which to live. Notice, there is no explicit prohibition against any act. Finally, the second tenet of Humanist Manifesto 3. Humans are an integral part of nature, the result of unguided evolutionary change. Humanists recognize nature is self-existing. We accept our life as all and enough, distinguishing things as they are from things as we might wish or imagine them to be. We welcome the challenges of the future and are drawn to and undaunted by the yet to be known. Nope, not a single prohibition of any act, much less a single word about agency or consent. In fact, the following words do not appear in any of the manifestos: genocide, murder, rape, slavery. For that matter, in all three manifestos, the word prohibit appears once. In Humanist Manifesto 2, in reference to not wanting to prohibit relationships between consenting adults. The word harm appears 4 times in Humanist Manifesto 2, in reference to the promises of immortal salvation and fear of eternal damnation, freedom to express sexual proclivities, and technology. Yet, not once is it even suggested that people should not do harm to one another. Likewise, the word suffering appears once in Humanist Manifesto 3, in reference to reducing suffering. Of course, 1, it's undefined, 2, it's relative, and 3, there's no explicit prohibition linked to it. Want to see a better moral framework than secular humanism? When a corporate souvenir button meant to sell cheeseburgers and hot wings promotes a superior moral framework, you have a tremendous problem. The fact is that secular humanism permits anything as long as the calculus checks out. It's utilitarianism with a fresh coat of paint. To demonstrate why this is true, at 1 hour 54 minutes and 50 seconds, I stated,
Kevin Berger says, Bertrand Russell argued for nuclear strikes, eugenics, and state population control. J. Huxley argued for eugenics and population management. P. Ehrlich did, as well as did Garrett Hardin. All of these are humanists who justified harm.
McNeil flatly denied this, saying,
No, they were secularists. They weren't humanists.
Wow.
Once again, when it comes to at least Bertrand Russell and Julian Huxley, being humanists, you are
clearly lying.
Garrett Hardin and Paul Ehrlich advocated for the same causes and were often linked to humanist movements. These individuals were humanists, and they argued that, pay attention now, doing the horrific things I referenced and which are cited would be in the service of maximizing human flourishing and minimizing suffering. Do you know what the number one rule of questioning a witness on the stand, especially during cross-examination, is? Never ask a question you don't already know the answer to. And that was exactly my approach. I already knew the answer and had the receipts when I asked. I wanted to see how he'd react. predictably he was
clearly lying.
As it stands, with the only metric being maximizing flourishing while minimizing harm, there is no way around it. Secular humanism unequivocally is utilitarianism with a different name. If Craig wants to argue otherwise, he has to demonstrate how nuking Japan to end World War II isn't permissible under secular humanism, to which my question is, how? How can he do that? Why is that not permissible? He can't use the do no harm argument because, one, it's not explicitly stated, and two, the calculus for maximizing flourishing versus minimizing harm checks out in that scenario. Yes, Bertrand Russell was a humanist. Yes, Bertrand Russell argued for genocide. For him, it was the Soviets. And yes, he did this using the humanist framework of maximizing flourishing and minimizing harm. No ands, ifs, or buts about it. But his bogus argument that secular humanists wouldn't do harm is even on shakier ground than that, because this is without taking into account the allegations against Jose Alvarez and James Randi by extension, Gary Mark, Huey P. Newton. Clearly, McNeil's idea that a secular humanist would not do harm is utter nonsense. So, where can he go from there? A no true secular humanist fallacy? Because again, the text does not have a categorical prohibition against doing harm. Intentionally. Because they want it to be adaptive and flexible and blah, blah, blah. The framers of secular humanism deliberately left holds which they could then selectively cover with modular Velcro patches when it's convenient. Hello, relativism. But in doing so, they are exposing the failures of and undermining the integrity of that framework. Premise 1. Bertrand Russell was formally affiliated with the humanist movement. Premise 2. Bertrand Russell argued in favor of launching a preemptive nuclear strike. Premise 3. The Humanist Manifestos provide no categorical prohibitions, but instead operate on the utilitarian principle of maximizing flourishing and minimizing harm. Conclusion. Russell justified genocide using the same utilitarian logic that secular humanism explicitly embraces. Oh, but Craig, it's worse than that. Why? Because Michael Shermer, a guy who actually signed the Humanist Manifesto 3, said what Russell only endorsed in a hypothetical situation was perfectly acceptable under secular humanism for real. Premise 1. Michael Shermer is a signer of the Humanist Manifesto 3. Premise 2. In Scientific American, Shermer explicitly endorsed the atomic bombings as morally justified, writing, "As moral dilemmas go, it seems clear enough that dropping the atomic bombs was the necessary and right decision to make." Conclusion. Therefore, there exists at least one confirmed Humanist Manifesto signer who publicly affirmed the morality of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings, demonstrating that on its own terms, secular humanism can and does yield endorsements of atrocity. Some 200,000 plus Japanese casualties. Genocide, something that is falsely argued as impossible under secular humanism. I asked one question and made one statement, and in both responses, he was
clearly lying.
Get this. I have demonstrated unequivocally this is the case. Craig, I swear, if you and I were to ever cross paths, I would call you out for this sort of deceit so fast and with so much evidence in the form of citations from credible scholarly sources that you wouldn't know what to do with yourself. I would suggest that you would be better served in learning the difference between exegesis and eisegesis, because what is required for any effective moral framework is exegesis. If it isn't explicitly stated unambiguously in the source text itself, then you are interjecting your own interpretation and imposing that to draw whatever conclusion you prefer. To recap, I challenged Craig McNeil to name a single immoral act that is explicitly prohibited by any of the Humanist manifestos, knowing full well he couldn't do that because no such prohibition exists in any of them. Undeterred, Craig tried to bluff one into existence, and I have shredded it with direct quotes from the manifestos. He said that Bertrand Russell and others weren't humanists, and I provided evidence that yes, they were. I also demonstrated that the idea that atrocities couldn't possibly happen under secular humanism by showing that Russell, a historical humanist, hypothetically justified genocide using the humanist utilitarian logic. And then, for good measure, I showed that Schirmer, a signer of one of the manifestos, actually endorsed genocide in a mainstream journal, explicitly calling it the necessary and right decision. Look me in the eyes and again tell me with a straight face how great secular humanism is. Tell me again how horrific acts, like genocide, are prohibited. Tell me again about how atrocities like genocide can't only be permitted, but can't be justified and endorsed within secular humanism. Say it, and everyone will know that you're still
Clearly lying.
Secular humanism doesn't just fail to stop genocide, it provides the framework to justify it, and its own manifesto signers have used that logic to endorse it. That is not an attack from the outside system. That's not an endorsement of some other moral framework. That is secular humanism on its own terms. And on its own terms, secular humanism is a nothing burger.